Welcome, everybody, to the Great Martech Hack. Words like great and Martech are probably easier to understand. The word hack is often has negative connotations, but in this instance, this really is about giving you, the audience and listeners, a shortcut, ways in which, by listening to this panel and listening to this session, you'll have ideas and where you can take action for your business. With me today, I've got an incredible panel. We've been very, very thankful for their time and their attention. I'm going to start with Laura Merton. Laura is with Hogarth Worldwide and is a Martech solutions architect. Hogarth, of course, owned by the biggest advertising business in the world, WPP. I think there were $17 billion in revenue last year. So when they do something, I think people really sit up and take notice. So we'll come back to Laura in a moment for an intro from Laura, who'll tell you all about herself. Joining Laura is Paola Marinoni. Paola is an ex-YouTuber and Googler, but for this instance is the CEO and founder of Buzz My Videos, which is a Martech business and very much at the forefront of helping brands and helping agencies and helping media really get the best out of Martech. And then also joining Laura and Paola is Carlos Doughty. Carlos is the founder of the Martech Alliance, which are an industry group which represent thousands of various stakeholders in Martech all around the world. And not only is he the CEO and founder of the Martech Alliance, but he's also a course instructor. And I'm sure he'll be sharing ideas with us and what's actually happening in the Martech space. And that's probably the best place to start it. So, Carlos, you and I had the pleasure of working together during 2020 on producing the Martech report, which we've done. Moore Kingston Smith, Moore Global has done in association with the Martech Alliance. Look, what's going on out there? What's driving Martech to such great success at the moment?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. Really excited for this session. Look, it's been fun working with you. I think Martech's having a moment, a particularly hot moment. It was, I suppose, cool for a bunch of nerds for some time, and it's hit a little bit of an inflection point. If I was to summarize where and how we got here, the world went digital overnight, quite literally. Obviously, everyone knows what happened in the pandemic. That had massive ramifications for all of us and how we operate. And instantly, we had to move, whether it was how people buy, how we work, how we engage. We had to move to a digital world at its most extreme. And at the core of that is you need to think about digital transformation. And at the core of digital transformation, for me, is Martech, a series of different tools, over 10,000 available to help you get there. And so with the pandemic, with the acceleration, with the need for change, with the need for adapt or die, people leaned in heavily for the investments, for the areas of Martech where perhaps once upon a time they were taking 3 months, 6 months or 12 months. Decisions were being made like that instantly. Let's go, let's invest, let's move quickly because we have to. And so Martech's gone from this sort of word that some marketers understood, some marketers invested in heavily, to front and center. And I think that's probably one of the first things we found working with you in the report was nearly 1 in 4 pounds being spent on Martech. So it's a real thing. It's a real discipline. It's a core marketing discipline that needs to be treated as such. It's more than a moment. It's making change, and it's front and center.
And Laura, 8 years ago, I had never come across the word Martech, and now I'm talking to a Martech solutions architect. What's going on? You're a Hogarth agency, and what are agencies doing about Martech, and why is this such a big thing for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting actually. I was previously heading up Martech in-house, and so I've just moved over to Hogarth, and Hogarth itself is content production at its core. So we tend to do production at scale. And I think as we've seen organizations move to personalization at scale, as we've seen across the industry, that being a kind of common theme, the need and the appetite for heaps of content to kind of nurture that personalization has grown. And I think exactly as Carlos said, the need for transformation to support that personalization has grown too. And actually the department I work in, it is marketing transformation. And I was brought in to kind of help support that growing hunger, that need for organizations to continue to transform. And to, at the heart of that is Martech. So my role is interesting actually, because I'm looking at either, supporting with designing a solution to help them with their transformation, or actually looking at their existing architecture and going, why is this not delivering what they need it to do? It's some of it's about, you use the term hack. Some of it's about doing that kind of growth hacking piece where you actually go, you've got all the core components, but they're probably just not plumbed right. And actually, now where we're seeing teams in-house being streamlined, slimmed down, budgets are cut, there's not enough talent in the market. Agencies like ours are coming in to help kind of support those teams in kind of, automating what already exists, fine-tuning it, streamlining it, really getting the most out of those investments that have been made. And the kind of clients that we're working with, they are, large global enterprises that possibly have put off doing these transformations for some time, or are kind of anchored to some legacy technology that, they've finally now gone, look, we need to do a full kind of transformation of this for us to really stay ahead of the market. So
well, I'm glad you brought up the legacy technology, because we're going to come back to that later on in the session. And but just staying with this and getting through these round of intros, Paola Marinoni, you've been running Buzz My Videos now for 10 years. So, well, when did it feel right for you to, decide that, you're a part of this Martech wave of acceleration and transformation? When did that happen?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's very much of an honor, and very interested to hear from the other panelists as well. So what I saw in the last 10 years, and actually started at Google in 2006, when Google was not a big thing back then, and YouTube in 2009. And when we started with Buzz My Videos in 2011, we were creating technology mainly for the YouTubers, which were, to be honest, at that time, the only ones getting it. And then what we saw, especially in the last couple of years, like from the year before the pandemic, really 2-3 years, we actually started having calls from big like global publishers or like global brands, and they were asking us to actually use the technology to grow organically on YouTube and use that from a Martech perspective. So we were like, okay, wait a second. We never thought we were this thing. And then it was actually the market asking for that. And what we noticed was the need was there. It was not mature enough at the very beginning when we started the business. It was really mature for creators, for YouTubers, because they were really getting the platform, the audience, how to build content, how to market it, with no budget, basically. But and then there was a lot of interest from whoever was cutting edge, like 2-3 years ago, and then it was like a big boom, like everybody needs to do something. And
was this pandemic? Was pandemic driven? Was it before the pandemic?
So that started before the pandemic, and then the pandemic definitely accelerated it, because then at the beginning, when we started building more of the business line for brands and agencies and platforms and publishers, we were really testing the market with very big names, because they asked us mainly. It was like really inbound. Then when we were going outbound, people were like, oh, that's interesting. It's nice to have. I don't really understand it very much. And we were like, okay, fine. And then the pandemic was like, okay, people were listening. So the status quo was over. That's it. People were really curious to see whatever were the potential solutions and anything to actually get to the customers, and making sure that they were really leveraging everything they had. So the pandemic was a big accelerator, especially in understanding there was an opportunity there in other solutions of any kind of solutions. And that definitely accelerated the moving towards the Martech space.
And Laura, I'm just back to you. You must have seen huge, increases in Martech spend, during the pandemic. You talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we're still seeing it. I think, I think there's a couple of big trends. I saw a lot of organizations moving, commerce. I think that's a clear standout for us, is that a lot of organizations have been moving to direct to consumer. So away from sort of combined marketplace to bringing, trying to strengthen their brand presence by driving individuals, and brands, that consumer products that you probably wouldn't expect people to be going straight to the individual to buy from. I think we're seeing a greater trend in that. But yeah, I think that a lot of organizations, they're investing now, not realizing that it's a huge undertake, and that the fact that it's going to take a long time to get these systems in place and really kind of running at full capacity as well. And we're still seeing that.
Back to your earlier point, though, I mean, how much of that is about trying to deal with the what did you call it, the legacy technology? I mean,
yeah,
are you seeing that as being a real factor?
With some clients, I think it's a bit of a mix. I think we're seeing either, if I take, for example, personalization, some of that's individual, organizations that have got sort of, legacy CMSs and they're needing to upgrade to DXPs. And part of that issue is they're going, okay, well, we want to get a DXP in place. That seems simple enough, but actually it's about, how do you deliver that content? And how do you make sure that is sort of embedded within the rest of your ecosystem? And it's all very well sort of taking, replacing that kind of web presence layer without maybe considering things like your digital asset management tool. So if they've not got that in place, it actually makes a lot of it harder to kind of automate. And that's where a lot of these organizations are really needing to kind of focus on, is that capability to automate, to streamline, to really drive efficiencies because of the lack of maybe team size or capacity in-house to run these projects and to do their day-to-day jobs. So
and I remember when I know, because you contributed to the Martech report with myself and Carlos last year, and there was a lovely quote from you which said that some marketers are dealing with more than 40 different pieces of different Martech tools at the moment. That's an extraordinary number.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think of a sort of typical Martech stack, I mean, everyone, I'm sure, who's into Martech has seen that Martech landscape, and, to be able to manage not just your kind of core platforms, but it's all the additional tools and apps that sit alongside that to just deliver, a single campaign. And to really get that ecosystem running smoothly. And actually, that's where I think we're, we talk about some of the outputs of that report, where, the trend of organizations trying to build their Martech in-house teams. And for us, from an agency side, I think it's interesting thinking about what our position is there in the market. But actually, we're still seeing a lot of clients come to us to help kind of bolster those teams and to almost kickstart a lot of the projects. So, you've got these in-house Martech teams running, their day-to-day campaigns, supporting with in-house marketers, getting them trained up to use the systems, making sure that they're fine-tuning what's already in place. And then, if you want to do another initiative on top of that, there's just not enough bandwidth for the teams. So that's where we're coming in. We're kind of designing automations. We're helping with large scale configurations. And then we're working collaboratively with the teams to then sort of knowledge share, hand that back over to them, and let them run with the projects. So it's definitely an interesting time in the agency world.
I bet, and we'll be talking about the agency world a bit more in a moment. Carlos, over to you. 10,000 vendors in the Martech space now? Seriously?
Yeah, it's a bit crazy. At the same time, you could say there's 100. And so there's the long tail. There's definitely the long tail. There's kind of your core Martech stack, what you really need to operate. And then there's loads of amazing innovation, but some of these are plug and play, really cheap, really simple. It's an app that sits on top of my CRM or my CDP or whatever else it might be.
Yeah.
I think, I think it's important to remember the point of that landscape and the point of that 10,000. I don't think Scott Brinker ever went, this is helpful. This is how you go and find your marketing stack. I think it's really a PR piece. It's about demonstrating the innovation in the space, the growth, and it serves that beautifully. We see that, we recognize it's growing fast. There's loads of options, and we recognize there's some challenges with selecting the right tech. What's more interesting and more helpful is to look at the categories within that. So there's 49 categories. Remove those, understand the use cases for which they deliver something of value, and then get into, is it X, Y, and Z? Is it purple? Is it green? Is it blue? Not here's 10,000 pieces. I think there's some interesting times ahead. I think one thing we've seen the last 12 months has been a fair amount of acquisition. And I think sort of the major players, is there going to be space for more innovation, or are we going to see continued acquisition? I think I'll give an example. Adobe, Adobe's been particularly big in acquisitions. It acquired Workfront some time ago now, acquired Marketo. I think we'll probably see more of those major players, the major marketing clouds, acquire significant solutions. And I think the CDP space in particular, I think a couple of things. CDPs are booming, incredibly hot right now, more data than ever. Brilliant, great. However, you've got to use it intelligently. That's where a CDP comes in. And I think there's a few of the marketing clouds which are still not there with their CDP solution. And so it wouldn't surprise me to take some of the powerful, independent, pure play CDPs and see them swallowed up by some of the big boys.
Does that not in itself create more worry and concern for organizations who want to invest in Martech, that if they feel it's such an ever-changing landscape, is there not a tendency then for them to, want to sit on their hands a little bit and wait until, all this M&A activity has been exhausted, and then that's when they should be investing more? What would be your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. Yeah, you'd love to future-proof, but I don't think there is such a thing. I think the other thing is, from the point of acquisition, you're talking about 2 or 3 years maybe for full integration. So even if you waited for the day they sign the dotted line and Slack's part of Salesforce or Workfront's part of Adobe, it's going to be some time until it's fully integrated. And I don't think anyone's got time now. I think the opportunity is there. And so Laura mentioned D2C. I think it's particularly interesting in that space. What you've seen is, with great MarTech, you can move quickly. And with great MarTech and automation, potentially you don't need as big a team. And so if you don't adapt, if you don't move, if you don't invest and have the right tech in place, you risk being overtaken by a smaller player. Particularly in the D2C space, I think has been interesting, where if you're taking too long, if you're thinking too much, you're probably going to fall behind. And especially because of the pandemic, and especially with the accelerated change that we've seen.
Well, I think this really supports the figures supported too, don't they? Luma, reported a 214% increase in M&A activity, and you've mentioned some of the big names, Adobe and Twilio, for example, acquiring ZipWhip, Intuit acquiring Mailchimp. And even it's not just M&A, it's also funding as well. Sitecore, I think, were referred to in the Martech report as well, that they broke all records last year when they onboarded over $1 billion in fresh funding. And Laura, back to you on the agency side. It must be.
Sorry, Damien. May I just jump in 1 second? The 10,000.
Please, go for it. Yeah.
Thank you, because I think the question you were asking, Carlos, is very interesting. On the 10,000, is that too much? What's going to happen? And there is one thing that I noticed very much working in this space, is that because of most of the times there's a lot of interest in anything that is the top tier, so the big household names, and sometimes like Martech is really key and pivotal for everything that is small and medium businesses. There's a huge opportunity there, and that's why as well a lot of Martech is gonna increase massively. So I don't think that the 10,000 is going to go down. It's probably going to go up in this year for sure, and next year again, and then consolidation is going to happen, that's for sure. But I think that the fact that now the paradigm, so that the way that everybody's doing business is changing. So it's not changed completely because it's not 0 to 1, but it's changing. Anything that is small and medium business now has a huge opportunity to actually grow massively. So that's never been easier for them to actually make business compared to bigger companies. So, and Martech serves as well those kind of companies, which is really a big opportunity, and it's really about timing. So I think that's going to be interesting to see what the numbers is going to be in 1 year or two, because with high marginality and high efficiency and the huge demand, that 10,000, I'm betting is probably going to be 20,000 in 12 to 18 months, because there's a huge opportunity from an economical point of view.
I think it's certainly going to be interesting, Paola, to see how the growth changes. And I mean, I've stopped trying to second guess, the how many more companies, we'll see in the Martech space. And but moving just back into the agency world again, Laura. I mean, there's been agencies, of course, have been very busy as well on the M&A front too, haven't they? I mean, Dentsu acquiring Merkle, and Ogilvy have done several acquisitions, including Pennywise and Who Digital. WPP, Hogarth. I mean, what? How are you seeing the world from an M&A standpoint, from a Martech perspective?
I mean, I think from our side, I mean, so I've been at Hogarth now for sort of, I think about 7 to 8 months. I mean, WPP, obviously, huge organization. I mean, I'm still learning about the different agencies that are a part of it and the ones that it continues to acquire. I think the trends from an acquisition point of view, I think, data huge, and whether that be from a kind of sort of insights, research point of view, or indeed more down the route of sort of CDPs, AI, ML, etc. From our point of view, when we're looking at how we, grow, I think there's that continuous question of whether you organically grow or whether you buy in the talent to support clients. If for example, you see a huge spike in demand and we need to support those clients, then that's certainly an option for us, and it's probably the quickest option as well.
But Laura, also speaking as an agency, does this move towards in-housing by advertisers and brands, does that not concern you? I mean, if they're moving their Martech skills and capabilities, I mean, where would this leave agencies in the future?
So I still think there's a strong need for agencies. I mean, interestingly, as I mentioned at the beginning, so I headed up marketing technology teams in-house before I moved agency side, and with all the will in the world, we still needed agency support. And generally that was for either two things. It was a capacity issue. So as I mentioned before, teams that, I don't think there's anybody out there, any organization where they've got teams or individuals who are having leisurely days where they're, sat twiddling their thumbs, wondering what to do next. We know from the pandemic that there is a huge burnout. People are working flat out. And there's a skill shortage. So we've got organizations where we've got people who are hugely overworked, where we don't have enough talent to support the growing need for technology, for automation. And I think that's definitely where agencies are going to come in to support. They're going to come in for these individual projects. They're going to come in to kickstart, to kind of overhaul something, to support with automation, to implement, to configure. They might even bring sort of the strategic lens that isn't necessarily in the organization as it stands. And I think the other thing that we'll bring is that view of the landscape. Or agencies, they're in a unique position where they're actually working with a huge, varied number of clients, and they're understanding, what are the pitfalls, what are the trends, what are the opportunities to be made, and they're taking that to their clients. So I think there's definitely there's still a place for agencies.
Okay.
And I actually think that's probably going to grow.
Okay, and I like the two key words there to focus on. So it's about, from an agency standpoint, it's about their capacity to be able to support their clients, and it's also about their own unique perspective being part of the the bigger picture. The skills shortage thing, I knew this was going to come up in the conversation because it really is such a massive area, and in fact, our own CEO at More Global said in the report that Martech maturity can only be realized when skills and training match the technology. And a lovely segue for you, Carlos, because I'm sure there are lots of people beating a path to your door to get skilled up in Martech technologies right now. What are you seeing there?
Yes, so two interesting things. One, I think when we look at the report, if we rewind slightly on that piece around Martech maturity, we tried to look at 4 components, those being planning and strategy, people and teams, platforms, apps and ecosystems, and process and marketing ops. And what stood out was the area where there was the lowest level of maturity, people and teams. It was the need for people to drive maturity that was underbaked. And it's exactly what we see. Here's something that's super interesting that we've seen just in the last 3 months, especially. Lots of agencies coming to us to help train their teams. We've got instances of we've got 40, 50 brand new consultants specializing in Martech. We need help training them. It's not that they're not experienced. It's bringing it all together, organizing it, understanding really how can you be strategic about how you manage your Martech. So we're seeing more demand than ever, especially on the agency side, but also on the brand side. Interestingly as well, we've seen people come on our programs, love it, really like it, take literally the coursework from the programs to their board to get investment. But then they're doing this not just to say we're going to run this independently, but also still working with their professional services teams alongside that, whether that's on a project basis or whether that's we need to fine tune and really go deep on how we get maximum return on time and cash from X piece of technology. So definitely a skill shortage. And I would say I talk a lot to agencies, Martech vendors and brand side. One of the first things that happens in any call is, by the way, we're recruiting right now. Anybody you can recommend? Anybody you can recommend in this market? And so the bits of feedback I always get are also around, because there's a shortage, we're seeing earnings increase, more and more opportunities. So if you are a Martech specialist, Laura, for example, you're in a good place right now. You're sought after, and so there's good opportunity. Added to this, we talked a little bit about M&A. Lots of cash flooding Martech vendors as they look to accelerate their growth. That means they're in a position to offer greater rates as well. So I think we're seeing a little bit of talent wars when it comes to a tech provider being able to offer more than potentially a brand and potentially an agency. So yeah, definitely a booming space, good opportunity, and a shortage of skills.
Okay, and Paolo, I wanted to come on to you with this because we've only got a certain amount of time today, and much as I'd like to chat about all this, we should probably start to move into let's call it the home straight, and this is the hack part of the great Martech hack. So Paolo, as a Martech business and as somebody who's been around this space and seen all the changes in Martech, not just giving advice to the media industry, but to give advice to all business around. What's the one thing that Paula from Buzz My Videos reckons that businesses should be doing right now regarding Martech?
Well, and just going back to the maturity that you were saying before, and understanding what to do, there is a lot of opportunity from anything that was there before. And there is one thing that I always reckon is completely unknown from most of the marketeers, which is the organic side of video across the board. I mean, YouTube being one of them. There are many different platforms, but anything that is like organic is actually driving you lots of traffic, and it could be like driving you lots of revenue. Like in the future, not just in the present. And that's what I saw by talking to anybody like in the industry. And it's interesting how, for example, YouTube, that has been there forever, like it's 15 years, it's super old now, it's not really a new platform. Knowledge is not there yet, unless it's for advertising spend. And from my experience, I'm really surprised. I mean, I honestly surprised. I mean, from a business perspective, I'm pretty, I see it as with a lot of interest, but I'm super surprised that this has not been leveraged enough. So people look at what we are doing, for example, with video SEO, which is SEO has been a basic for 10 years right now. So SEO is like bread and butter. Video SEO is not. So being first number one in Google with your videos from YouTube is like, wow, people are looking at that like, oh, wow, can I do that? Yes, you can. We can do that. And so seeing what you have already in place is brilliant, because there's huge value that you actually can drive from anything you already have. Plus,
Okay,
you then keep investing.
That's your point. Then it's not to just leap out there and assume it has to be something new. Perhaps it's actually take a breath. So we're like, what have we actually got here in terms of assets, and how do we make the most out of what we have?
Correct. That's phase zero. So you have huge value there already. So why don't you leverage the value you already have, and then read the data, and then start investing in anything new? And that's brilliant. The combination with archive and new is the perfect combination. But you don't have to do new stuffs before you actually understand everything else, because you're just losing an opportunity. So it's you can do it. It's absolutely fine, but still there's a lot of value to be taken there.
Okay, and Carlos, does Paola's advice fly in the face of leaping in there and just getting stuck in with Martech?
No, I think there's a bit of both. I think there's instinctively, I think most people want to go, what are the quick wins? Because the strategy, the big piece is tough. But you can do a bit of both. You can have those projects running concurrently of, here's my quick wins, here's some little bit of optimization, a little bit of improvements where I can see quick return. But Paola's absolutely right. You still need to think very strategically if you want to get maximum return, whether it's on time, cash, the overall realization of your project. If you're not strategic about it and you try and move too fast, I think there's just a balance between over planning or probably more just sort of a classic sizable organization where perhaps it's a little bit too bureaucratic in the decision-making process. So if you can balance out those two, I think you get the best of both.
And so back to the Martech hack again, Carlos. So what's your words of wisdom for people watching and listening?
Cool. I'll split into three. I would say one is anybody in Martech, you're sat in a good place right now. Market's booming, so that should be good for your career. If you're sat there, if you've got knowledge, so if your brand sides, I would say double down. Martech's a real marketing discipline, and you should keep building your knowledge in that space, because you have an opportunity to separate yourself and be that subject matter expert internally. If your agency sides, I think the bits Laura said are so true. There is definitely a place for agencies or consultancies to work in collaboration. I don't think it's a binary decision between in-house versus agency or consultancy. And also the reality between I want to in-house my Martech versus can I think sometimes there's a bit of a gap between those. So I think agencies are very well placed. I think more and more agencies expand their services in that space. And again, I would say that's a massive opportunity. There's a shortage of talent. There's not a shortage of need. So there's a massive gap in opportunity there. And then vendor side, so from tech providers' perspective, what I'm seeing and hearing is markets are booming. Markets are booming. It's especially true of a few different areas. DXPs, CDPs, DAMs, commerce, they're the areas I'm hearing most about. There are others, which we talk about in the report as well. I would say the opportunity to really excel in this environment, if you're a Martech provider, is really refining and understanding digital selling. So the new world, whatever that looks like, is going to have a strong digital selling presence to it. So you need to think more carefully about how you engage, you sell in this environment. I don't think we're going to go back to 100% in person. The days of loads of in-person meetings, we will have some of that, but I don't think to the same degree. So really refining your selling process for this environment. And that could be, for example, embracing opportunities around direct mail, for example, around mixing direct mail with your sales process, that you engage with somebody on a Zoom meeting, you chat about something, you send them a book in the post, really different touch points that are not just face-to-face. Ways to develop that rapport and engagement will be opportunities to really accelerate your deal flow, basically.
Okay, and Laura, last but not least, back to the agency perspective, and words of wisdom for our viewers and listeners about the whole Martech thing.
So I think my words of wisdom are probably partly my own passion area. But I think the opportunity for a lot of organizations now, and actually probably more of a need as well, is to really look at their full architectures and understand where they're being inefficient. I think the opportunity in the future is going to be for those organizations that have learned to streamline and automate. Whether that be for commerce, whether that be for personalization. And I think at the heart of that is going to be data. It's going to be understanding what is your data flow. Are you connected? Are your systems properly integrated? Can you remove that inefficiency for someone having to manually upload or manually approve or extract and clean and upload somewhere else? I think these are the kind of things where there's just not going to be the option to do that in the future, because there won't be the capacity in the teams. If you want to also stay competitive, by producing these beautifully connected, personalized customer journeys, I think the data is going to be at the heart of that. And the upside of that is once you are fully connected, you're also going to get the benefits of better understanding those journeys, from being able to be then more data driven in your decision making. So my advice would be to either bring in an agency, or if it's in-house, really look at your full architecture and understand that data flow.
Well, look, I wish we had more time to continue talking about this. I find it, as you all three of you know, I find it a fascinating subject, and from more global's perspective, we see it as a very, very fundamental part of the whole future, not just of the advertising and marketing sector, but media as a whole. And so we're looking forward to see if what Paola says is going to be the case. We're actually going to have not 10,000 vendors to concern ourselves with, but 25,000, perhaps 30,000. And Carlos, this will obviously mean many, many more members flocking their way to the Martech Alliance. So, you work in Martech, so you're in a good place too. And Laura, being part of the biggest agency group in the world, it's been great having your advice. Paola, thank you for joining us. Somebody who's worked with the biggest brands in the space, Google, YouTube, and now running a very, very successful Martech business. We wish you the very best of luck for that.